What's happening, people? What's happening, folks? Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another quick update video from your boy CJ from the Gunner's Corner. And this one, we're going to be chatting about a certain man named Eberechi Eze. Right, let's get straight to the point. We have to talk about Eze. We have to talk about the fact that this guy here, right, this man Eze, he's exactly what the Premier League was always going to be afraid of. He's exactly what this Arsenal football club needed. Some would say, he's exactly what Arteta himself was afraid of. And we'll get into that and what that means as I go through this video. But ladies and gentlemen, please remember to like, share, hype, and subscribe, as it really, really does help us out. As we always say, we're looking to improve and expand and grow this channel. And, we're on a good trajectory at the moment. So if you guys can continue to be there with us and for us and help us out and, give us a follow, give us a subscribe, tell a friend to tell a friend, like the video, all that good stuff, people. But yes, the man, the myth, the legend, the boy Eze. Crystal Palace fans tried to tell us, they tried to warn us about this guy. They tried to warn us and tell us about run-in Ebbs. We didn't listen. We were not prepared to hear it. At least a certain manager was not prepared to hear it, right? Eberechi Eze, when it comes to the run-in, when it comes to crunch time, boy, does he deliver. And what he's doing for us at the moment is exactly what we needed. And as I said, it's exactly what the Premier League would have been afraid of, alarm bells for around the rest of the Premier League as soon as we signed this guy. Keep in mind, we signed as a back in the back end of the transfer window at the beginning of this season, right? So we're talking August. Um, and he started the season, he played against Chelsea at Stamford Bridge, and he had a couple games where, it was looking like at the start of the season that he wasn't going to sign for us, right? We started our campaign without him. We had preseason without him, etc. And it's looking like he wasn't going to sign for us. And wow, can you imagine if we did not sign him? That has a lot to do as well with me questioning Arteta's, you know, talent IQ, right? And the type of players that he's going for, the type of players that we're going for in the transfer window. Because, it took Eze having to ring Arteta's line and beg him to come to the club for us to finally sign him. We were not, if reports are to be true, tried and trusted, we were not going to sign Eze if Kai Havertz didn't pick up that injury at the beginning of the season, right? Havertz got injured for a significant period of time. We were told that it was going to be a serious injury, so therefore we went back into the market and found the space for Eze as a result of Havertz's injury. That for me is crazy work. That is not good enough as far as I'm concerned because if Kai Havertz was fit, what means we weren't going to sign Eze? So in the end, we fluked that signing. We were lucky to sign him because, like I said, if Havertz is fit, we're not signing a player like Eze. And wow, what a shame that would have been. We need him. Quite clearly, what Eze is showing at this moment in time is that we needed and have always needed a player like his in this team. It was meant to be Martin Odegaard, right? It was meant to be maybe even Bukayo Saka, but obviously Saka has tailed off this season for one reason or another. Right now, we're finding out because of injury concerns when it comes to Saka. And Odegaard, his form just hasn't been the same since the 22-23 season slash 23-24 season. And again, you can put that down to a couple of things. You can put that down to injury. Um, but Odegaard is running out of time to prove his worth again to the team and to the squad. He's not doing the same things like he was doing once upon a time, and that's what I'm talking about. There is match winning quality, right? Whether it's you know playing the eye of the needle pass to get that crucial assist that leads to a goal, whether it's getting goals himself, right? Long range shooting from outside the box, that was Odegaard's specialty in the 22-23 season, certainly. Arriving late in the box, finishing in the box, right? Having the eye for goal, or just having a pop from outside the 18. But a certain man named Eberechi Eze has been picking up that mantle, folks. Eze has picked up where 22-23 Odegaard left off. And because we were expecting Odegaard to be that player and to carry on and to kick on from that first t title race a couple of years ago, it hasn't worked, and therefore we've needed an Eze, and Eze is the maverick in the squad that we've needed. Brennan Ebbs, right? The back end of the season where we're under pressure, this team is desperate to win a trophy, to win a title, to win one of the majors. In this case, the Champions League, we haven't won ever. Premier League, we're looking to win for the first time in 20 years. Where it looks like everybody else is feeling pressure, Eze just looks like the most calm, cool, collected guy in the Emirates Stadium. And you can even see it just the way he does his interviews, right? He did an interview before the last round of our Champions League tie. I think that one was when we were playing Sporting Lisbon. Sporting Lisbon quarterfinal, second leg at the Emirates. Eberechi Eze, he was doing the pre-game presser, because in the Champions League ties they always get, one player representing each club to do the press conference, the pre-game press conference, either alongside the manager or just individually. And Eze did his. He did his pre-game presser with in front of the journalists, in front of the media prior to that Sporting Lisbon game. And at that time we were under a bit of pressure, right? Got knocked out of the FA Cup. Um, we were not in the greatest run of form. Obviously, we had won the first leg 1-0 against Sporting Lisbon in Portugal. We won that first leg 1-0. But coming back off the international break, right, we weren't in the greatest form. Like I said, losing the FA Cup. Um, and I think we had just lost to Bournemouth even. So we haven't been in a good run of form. Obviously, we won on the weekend against Newcastle with the benefit of hindsight looking back on it now. But at that time, right in the middle of going into that second leg at the Emirates against Sporting Lisbon in the quarterfinal of the Champions League, as I sat down with the media and did his press conference um, before that game, and you know, you can tell he was asked questions, is being pressed about what the narrative is around Arsenal at the moment, the bottling tag, what other rival fans might say, people who don't want Arsenal to win, how is that viewed in the locker room? How is that viewed with him as a player, etc. And as a, he just he didn't care. He doesn't care about that stuff because his words were, when we win, right? When we win is what, as I said in that press conference, they'll have to deal with it. And he just comes across as such a nonchalant, laid back character, right? Obviously, you see managers when they're in the hot seat, when they're under pressure, individually or collectively as a team, as a group, as a club, managers often, sometimes they show their edginess, they show their discontent, they show their nerves even. Arteta's done it recently, right? Even the back end of last year when we were competing in the Champions League against PSG, when we fell out of the title race against Liverpool, every time Arteta would go into a press conference, he was pressed. And, I remember at that time he was asked about the number nine. He was asked about, why we didn't sign a number nine or a striker in January last season, right? And then, his answers were very pushback, very fiery. I never, he'll mention things like, oh, I never said that, we didn't need a striker, kind of double backing on his word. Um, so flip-flopping all the time last season Arteta was doing. I remember in the semifinals last year against PSG when we got knocked out, he said that, Luis Enrique told him, Luis Enrique and the PSG staff said that, we were the better team and the best team in Europe and all this stuff, and the best team lost that semifinal. Luis Enrique came back afterwards and said that that wasn't true. So when managers, whoever, players go in the media and say these things and push back with really fiery, feisty responses to journalists, it shows a bit of lack of composure sometimes, right? It shows that, the journalists, whether they intentionally do it or not, they're triggering, you know, managers or players to get a rise out of them, to get a reaction out of them, and a lot of times it works, right? And Arteta, he's bitten on it a couple times, and he's bitten on the fact that he's getting pressed when he's under pressure, and when he fires back, and you can tell this is a guy really under pressure. But Eze, man, when that guy speaks, and when he's speaking, like I said, a la his most recent press conference ahead of that Champions League second leg against Sporting, just calm, composed, collected. He referred to the journalists by saying, you guys will say whatever you're going to say. Just kind of in the most nonchalant as a kind of way. Whenever, he's questioned about the narrative around Arsenal at the moment and what the people are saying about the club at the moment. And like I said, with the whole bottling tag, he knows what it is. He says, you guys are going to say whatever you're going to say. That's your guys' job, is to create stories, is to create these narratives, around Arsenal if there's bad results, et cetera, et cetera. But Eze knows, man, he blocks all that outside noise, and that's exactly what he said. The outside noise, he's blocking it. He still has high hopes and confidence for that the club can go on to achieve this season, and saying, when we win, once we get over the line, everyone's gonna have to deal with it. Those same people who, were essentially, bantering us or clowning us or trolling us in the public eye, you know. So, listen, man, Eze, and like I said, just hearing him speak, watching how he operates, just a cool, calm character who just doesn't look under pressure at all. It translates into how he plays on the pitch. And the guy is just so calm and collected on the pitch when other players, even our captain, Odegaards of the world, are looking flustered, telling fans to calm down. Eze just goes about his business and he just plays his football. Sometimes it's a little bit too relaxed for us for our liking sometimes, but it's who he is. It's how it made him who he is as a player. And he mentioned that again in that press conference that he trying not to sacrifice too much his principles of how he plays as a player. He's trying not to sacrifice that too much because he got here for that. He got to this level because of his character, right? So that nonchalant, laid back style of play and that character trait that he has, he brings that on the pitch. And again, yes, maybe it's not the most um, intense looking, right? Maybe he looks a little bit too laid back at times, but it's a man who just has composure, has confidence and believes in himself, who backs himself. And he never looks flustered. He never looks like he's under pressure. He never looks like he's panicking. So long may that continue for a guy who's going to continue to produce. And we've now seen on the pitch, he won us that game against Newcastle with brilliance, a moment of quality. He won us obviously that tie against Bayer Leverkusen in the round of 16 of the Champions League at the Emirates, right? With that beautiful strike from distance. He scored his goals from against the Spurs in the North London derbies in both the home leg and the return leg. Brilliant performances. I remember him sparkling against Everton recently in the 2-0 victory that we had at the Emirates in the Premier League right before the international break. He didn't score in that one, but he played brilliantly. Played brilliantly against Man City at the Etihad. Probably should have, was unlucky not to put us ahead with that effort that hit the post on the left foot. This is a guy now who's turning up when we need it, and this is a player who is playing completely, just with that freedom. And again, going back to that press conference, he was pressed about, his struggles when he first came into the team. And again, that balance of not sacrificing his laissez-faire character or not sacrificing who he is as a player, in terms of his style and his maybe nonchalant, laid back style, balancing that with coming to a team like Arsenal and under a manager like Arteta, who, very much demands, intensity and, hustle and work rate and energy, especially playing out on that left wing, right? And it just goes to show that, once he's adapted, which it looks like he finally has, he now understands what it is to play under Arteta and play for Arsenal. Coming from a team like Crystal Palace, he understands what that is now, and you can see him looking a lot more settled, right? He had a rough spell earlier on in the year, right? Earlier on in the season, where he was benched for quite a while. Um, Let me just pull it up here. Um, so let's go back to this. Right. So following a high-profile start to Arsenal, a hat trick in late November 2025, Eze was benched by Mikel Arteta for a significant spell starting in mid-December. So the initial bench spell. So after being substituted against Wolves on December 13, 2025, Eze was an unused sub for 4 consecutive Premier League matches, right? So that alone, I mean, for a player who was signed for that big amount of money, right? 60 plus mil, you're expected to come in and be a crucial member of the squad, but significantly, you know, uh, in and around that time period as well, we saw him get dragged essentially, um, like in the game against Aston Villa at Villa's ground because he didn't track back the runner. Matty Cash it was who scored the first goal at Villa Park. Didn't track back Eze at that time, lost his man, and we already know how much Mikel Arteta demands from his wingers. So if you're playing out on that left wing under Mikel Arteta, the work rate has to be high. And as I said at that time, at Villa Park in December, in and around that same time period, lost his man when he didn't track back Matty Cash. Matty Cash scored that first goal at Villa Park. Obviously, that day we lost 2-1. Um, and Eze was very much, Arteta was not happy with Eze at that time. And as you can see, like I said, the following games, he became out of favor, right? After, like I said, a great start to the season from the time he signed until, November. He was one of our bright sparks. He was very much heavily involved in the team, when we won big games, whether it was Bayern Munich in the Champions League, where he started that one, played brilliantly, whether it was, like I said, the North London Derby, etc. Um, he was very crucial and influential in that first part of the season in that run. Um, so December comes around and it's like, you're frustrated because You want to see that kind of player on the pitch playing football, doing what he loves best. But, again, the adaptation period was a bit of a struggle for him, fell out when he was at fault for not tracking back Matty Cash at Villa Park, as I said, for that goal, and then came out of the team. Arteta took him out of the team, and then yeah, for a good while, we didn't see him. As I mentioned, four consecutive Premier League matches, not even really coming off the bench, um, not starting obviously, and that went well into the new year, into 2026, the start of 2026. Jog your memory back to a few months ago. At the start of 2026, still not playing. And I believe, yeah, I think he finally got a first start, proper start in the team against Wigan in February 15th, I believe it was 2026. Wigan in the FA Cup, where he sparkled, he started, had a couple of assists, ran the show, played in central midfield, albeit the opponent was Wigan, but he had to put in a performance that said to the manager, "Hey, I'm still here." And that was the first sort of time that we saw him starting to get back into the team properly. Was again that Wigan game in the FA Cup. Um, and I think that Wigan game was followed by Wolves at Molineux. Famously, we saw, the 2-2 draw that we had there, as they would have expected to start that one on the back of a great performance. Um, Arteta elected not to start Eze, and I remember Saka, I think, started in the 10 that game and scored. But yeah, Eze was benched, even after sparkling against Wigan in the FA Cup. Eze went back to the bench. Again, like I said, when we played Wolves at Molineux, back to the bench. That performance against Wigan obviously wasn't enough to get him a start, so he goes back to the bench. And after that game, the following couple games, I think the following press conference, Arteta admitted that Eze was upset and frustrated with the manager, with Arteta himself for being left on the bench against Wolves at Molineux, right? Surely you think that would be a game Eze can and should start. Um, you know, so it was tough. It was tough for Eze for a while. But following that Wolves game, I believe was the North London Derby at Tottenham's ground at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, where Eze returned to the team in a starting 11 capacity. And I think Odegaard wasn't available at the time. Odegaard was starting to pick up his injuries, you know, injury troubles and injury niggles. So Odegaard wasn't really heavily in the mix at that time. And so going into that North London Derby off the back of the 2-2 draw at Molineux, where Eze didn't start, you're in the Derby now, and you're thinking, okay, surely this is the time to start Eze again, because after Eze's great performance in the first in the initial game against Spurs in the fall, right, where he scored a hat trick, you're like, okay, it's now, yes, we're in the second half of the season, end of February, return game against Spurs in the North London Derby at their ground, right? There's no better time to get Eze back in the team than now. Get him into the team. Odegaard's still struggling with fitness. Get Eze in the team from the start, and maybe he can kick on and get some form against an opponent that he, will be highly motivated against because he already scored a hat trick against them earlier on in the season. So, lo and behold, Eze comes back into the team, does his thing, bags some goals again, has a brilliant performance, did Eze in that game, and you're thinking, yeah, Eze is back. Now let's give him a consistent run in the team. And I believe it was actually after that game when Arteta came out and said, yeah, Eze was frustrated with me for not starting him at Molineux against Wolves. So listen, Eze since then, he's found himself pretty regularly back into the team, has Eze. And that brings us to today, right? So the story of Eze is such that, started brilliantly when he first signed, honeymoon period, made his mistake against Villa in December for not tracking back the runner against Villa and Matty Cash when Matty Cash scored that goal as they playing out that left wing, and then had a tough spell where he wasn't starting for a long period of time, however many games it was. Um, fast forward, like I said, now to February, and he gets his first start against Wigan in the FA Cup, didn't start at Molineux, started at then following that game, started at Spurs in the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. And that brings us all the way now to today, right? So since February, back into February to today, Eze has been one of Arsenal's best players, absolutely one of the best players. Not just goals, but performances, and it's the types of goals as well, right? It's the goals that he's scoring. It's the quality of them. We do not have a player like Eze in this team in terms of a free spirit, in terms of that nonchalant character and approach on the pitch, in terms of that, Maverick style footballer where you just don't know what you're going to get from him because he can create his own moments of magic. A lot of people would say he hasn't been Arteta. And what I mean by that is, you know, we've seen Arteta, essentially he looks like he's controlling a lot of our attacking play and players, and therefore doesn't release the handbrake, right? And doesn't allow them to play with our freedom of expression. Um, a lot of our players look like they're playing in a system, in a structure that's controlled by the manager, and I include Bukayo Saka in that, right? But Eze being new to this team, you know, the running joke is that he hasn't yet been Arteta'd, right? Meaning he still has, as he's been adapting to our club and to how the manager wants us to play, Eze still has that freedom of expression in him, that unpredictability, that maverick style of play, right? That we just don't have otherwise in this team. There's nobody else who can really do what Eze does in this team, right? Like I said, look at the quality of the goals. Look at the Bayer Leverkusen finish at the Emirates in the Champions League second leg. Look at that goal on the weekend against Newcastle, right? Even Mansfield, I know the opponent is Mansfield, but Eze came on in that game when we were, I believe, 1-1 at the time against Mansfield, or we were struggling at that time against Mansfield. Eze came on, um, and bagged the goal, top bins, puts it in the top corner on his right foot from range, right? Like Eze, he has this ability, like, and that's the other problem too, right? I don't know if this is instruction. It looks like it's instruction, you would think by the way we play, but a lot of these players don't like to shoot from outside the box, right? Whether it's a lack of confidence, whether it's a lack of belief, like to have to take on strikes from distance, you have to have a belief in yourself and belief in your ability, right? And that's clearly what Eze has, right? A lot of these other players aren't showing it. There's so many times where Declan Rice has an opportunity to take a shot from range and he just elects not to do it. He did it on the weekend against Newcastle. Odegaard the same. He's lost that shooting ability. It looks like he's lost that belief and confidence that he can have a pop from distance, or at least, you know, turn an effort from distance into a goal. But Eze, right foot, left foot, that guy will have a shot. And in a system where we play so structured and so controlled, and we look like we're sometimes trying to walk the ball into the net a certain way. When you have a maverick and a guy like Eze who just has that ability to just, break down a stubborn defense or break down a low block by just, you know, having an effort, backing himself, believing in himself to have an effort at goal from distance. The clutchness of Eze. That's the word we're looking for, right? Clutch. I say clutchness. I'm not sure that was a word, but the ability to be clutch, to be that decisive player, to be a match winner. He showed it for Palace last season, right? And down the stretch, helping them to win an FA Cup against Man City, funny enough, in the final, right? Scoring a couple goals along the way in that tournament. And now just being the guy for us when in the run-in when it counts. And when everybody else looks like they're under pressure and looks like they're flustered and looks like the nerves are getting to them in the run-in, when it's crunch time, when there's fire in the kitchen, when the heat is on and the oven is burning, Eze is the most calm, cool, collected guy. And he's just playing his football as if it's any other day out in the park, right? And these are the kind of players that, we haven't had for a very, very long time, and certainly not under Arteta, right? Who's a player now that you would go and you would pay to go watch at Arsenal Football Club if it's not Eze? You know what I mean? Back when Arsene Wenger was the manager at this football club, the legend Arsene Wenger, there's three or four, five players that you would pay to go see, right? At that time. Alexis Sanchez, Mesut Ozil, Santi Cazorla, you know, in as recent as, one of the more recent attacking signings that were exciting, Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, right? These kind of players. There's a whole, and I don't even need to go back into the, era where we were winning trophies, the Invincibles and those kind of players that you had. I mean, Henri, Pires, Bergkamp, players that excite. Let's be honest, he used to sign a whole heap of those type of players. Obviously our Fabregases, our Van Persies, our Rosickis, these kind of players who can just create something out of nothing, those moments of brilliance, those moments of magic from individual players, the individuality that sometimes a manager can't coach and it can't teach. How many of those do we have now? I argue that Eze is the only one. Like I said, take him aside. Who else has that? Saka could be that guy. He was meant to be that guy. But even he at times he just looks so controlled in the system by the manager. And like I said, you know, those moments and those players who have that individuality that a manager can't coach, well, it looks like our manager at the moment is just the way we play. Just he is controlling everything and he wants to control everything. And he hasn't, he's been criticized for not signing those type of maverick attacking players who have those individual moments of brilliance. Why? Maybe because he just wants to be so in control of everything that those kind of players, your Rafa Leao's, your Vinicius Juniors even, right? Like Rodrigo's, those players with a little bit too much freedom of expression, those players like you know, look at Ryan Cherky. It's hard to see how Arteta would fancy a player like Cherky because again, just maybe the players like him who just look like they're having too much fun on the pitch. Cherky roams wherever he wants, and that's where Pep gives him the license to do that, right? Cherky roams wherever he wants on the pitch, and the players around him give him that structure to allow him to do so, right? Roams around on the pitch, will collect the ball from wherever he feels fit to benefit him in his game. Just has fun on the pitch, plays with a smile on his face. Obviously, he's doing the keep ups in the final against us, you know, um, which will wind up a lot of players and a lot of fans and whatnot. But it's okay. You like to see it sometimes, right? That just that individuality that so long as Ryan Cherky knows what's coming from, a player might give him a whack for that afterwards if you're trying to keep ups in the middle of a cup final. But it's just things like that, it's part of the game. It's you're having fun on the pitch. Ronaldinho obviously is the highest extreme of examples, like the best, right? Just you play the game with a smile, you have that individuality, you have that freedom. That's part of the beautiful game, right? That's why we love Brazilian footballers. Not so controlled, not so robotic, not so systematic. Just create, just brilliance, just individual moments, individuality. Sanchez, again, like I said, used to do it all the time, Alexis Sanchez. Just, get the team out of a hole when the team is playing poorly, just do something brilliant to win us a game. You know, last time last time out in our last title winning season with the Invincibles, Thierry Henry, that individuality. Again, we're naming the best of the best players here, but that individuality of Thierry Henry, specifically a game, if you guys recall, those who have been supporting Arsenal long enough, Liverpool, around these times in 2004 en route to going invincible. Prior to that, we were having a tough spell where I mentioned this previously, we were knocked out of the Champions League by Chelsea in the same week that we were knocked out of the FA Cup by Man United. And that's again that same week when it came to the weekend, Liverpool at Highbury, we were down. The chips were down at halftime. I believe we were down, or we were looking like crumbling at that point too, right? Having just lost the Champions League, having just lost out in the FA Cup. We go to the Premier League on the weekend against Liverpool, and we were, at halftime we were down. Either we were level or we were down at that time in that game. But and it looked like at that time our title hopes were fading too. But what did we do? Up steps Thierry Henry. Again, individual brilliance. Takes the ball, drives pretty much from the halfway line and runs through half of Liverpool's defense and runs through half their team, takes the ball, takes it on himself, takes the initiative, gets into the box, beats 4 or 5 players, um, sends Carragher and these guys to the ground, slots the ball in the bottom corner. Arsenal go on to win that game, and that was the momentum they needed to go on to win the league, right? So when the chips are down, when the guys are down, when you need somebody to step up and be that player, who's going to be that one? And Eze, all that to say, Eze can be that player for us. And all that early season adaptation period aside, right? Whether rightly or wrongly, the manager dropped him from December, from mid December up until February-ish, dropped him. Wasn't getting a run of games, wasn't getting many minutes in the team. But now that he's in the team, he needs to stay there, right? Now that he's in the team, he needs to stay here. And we hope that the injury that he picked up on the weekend against Newcastle is not serious, because I don't know. I'm not sure we win a significant trophy this season without Eze. You need match winners to win a Champions League. You need match winners and you need individual brilliance and you need quality to get you over the line in the Premier League and in major competitions. And at a time where the guys who are supposed to be doing it for us, your Sakas, your Odegaards, those guys are struggling through fitness concerns more than anything else. So up steps Eberechi Eze. Can you be that guy? It's time for you to be that guy. Like I said, very, very close to him being the match winner at the Etihad for us. On another day, that left foot effort hits the post, past Donnarumma, and goes in. How that didn't go in, I still don't understand to this day. It just defies the laws of physics. The way it hit the post, the way it bent in, it should have gone in the back of the net. But anyways, and you just see from that time, not even just that game alone, but that those are the signs that if we are going to get over the line in this league or even in the Champions League in a final, let's say if we get there, a player like Eze can be that guy for us. That moment of brilliance, the technique, the quality, whether it's a shot from range, whether it's a line split, a splitting pass, whether it's just, ability on the ball in game, beating one man, beating two men with the drop of a shoulder. These are the things that we do not see, we do not have. And he looks like a player who was unfazed, who was confident, he backs himself. He knew he always wanted to come back to Arsenal Football Club and be the guy. And what a story it can be if he can get us over the line, let it all work out, be the one at the end of the season after almost not even signing for the club. Be the one at the end of the season. Boyhood man comes home and gets his team over the line and gets a trophy. It's a story that kind of gives you goosebumps, and we hope it turns out that way, right? But I just can't believe that we almost let this guy go to Spurs of all clubs, or just not even sign for the football club, because we didn't pick up on it earlier. Like again, where is the talent ID, right? A player like that begging to come to our football club, it shouldn't even have been the case. We should have been begging him to come after, not having a player like him that we've needed for years in this team under Mikel Arteta. So by hook or by crook, I said fluke a little bit earlier, but it literally almost is. We were so lucky that we ended up with this guy because if we didn't have him, I'm not sure what we would be doing this season, to be honest with you. His moments already have produced massively for us. As recently as Newcastle this past weekend, 1-0, top bins, curler, right foot. We need this guy fit from now to the end of the season. He is the key to Arsenal winning a major trophy, in my opinion. So let me know what you guys think. Eberechi Eze, he is the man. He is the main man, not Odegaard, respectfully. Eberechi Eze. Get him in the team, whether it's off the left, whether it's centrally, I don't care. But he needs to be in this team. He needs to be in the starting 11 from now until the end of the season. Arteta, be brave. Make sure he's in the squad on the match day in these must-win games. Eze is that guy. He showed it time and time again. He showed it for Palace, and as I said at the beginning of the show, the Premier League, was always going to be fearful of this signing for that reason, right? For the reason of knowing what this guy's about. And if he can come to the Arsenal, he can be the difference between Arsenal winning a league title or not. He's that good. He's that different of a profile to what we already have. He is that Maverick that we just simply did not have before. That was the game-changing signing, not the Gyökeres. That was the game-changing signing. Eberechi Eze, because he goes against the grain of what we've been all about under this manager for the past few years, right? That control, that predictability, that sort of rigid, conservative football. That's not Eze. Eze is the difference maker in this team. And I have no doubt he's going to show it again before the end of the season. And we're going to be praising his name for years to come, right? That's legendary status right there, Arsenal through and through. So I'm going to stop talking about it before I continue to get my goosebumps about the boy Eze and what I can see him doing for us. He is slowly becoming one of my favorite players, if not my favorite player at the club. And he's a player that at his best you go to pay to watch him. That maverick footballer that we simply did not have before. So listen, ladies and gentlemen, please, like I said at the beginning of the video, like and subscribe to the channel. It really, really does help us out. This has been CJ from the Gunners Corner. I'm doing this one ahead of the Champions League tie that we have coming up against Atletico Madrid in the first leg in the Metropolitano in their stadium. Hopefully, Eze is fit for that one. If not, we need to preserve him and make sure he's fit for the games to come, for the remaining games in the season. But let's see how it goes. So up the Arsenal. Again, like and subscribe. Thanks again for being here. It's been CJ from the Gunners Corner, and I'll talk to you guys soon. We're out.